These mass graves are evidence of the most massive atrocity of which Saddam is accused, the slaughter of 300,000 Shiites, their remains only now being uncovered. They rose up against the dictator in 1991 after Saddam's defeat in Kuwait and were horrifically repressed. A crime denounced around the globe, but once again, the United States and its allies were complicit in those killings.
The United States had total responsibility for those uprisings. By militarily smashing Saddam Hussein, it created the possibility for the uprisings. And second, the first President Bush on the 15th of February twice called for the Iraqi people to rise up against Saddam Hussein.
That call came with the United States still battling Iraqi forces.
The world will not allow
President Bush suggested a way to end the conflict, a massive popular revolt.
There's another way for the bloodshed to stop, and that is for the Iraqi military and the Iraqi people to take matters into their own hands, to force Saddam Hussein, the dictator, to step aside.
The president's call was repeatedly broadcast all over Iraq.
The same message over and over again about, rise up. It's your time to do that. It's your duty to get rid of Saddam and his regime.
Zainab is a Shiite from the southern city of Karbala, one of thousands who joined the uprising.
I felt this is my fight. I was only 20 years old, coming out of high school, and there is no hope, there is no future inside Iraq. So it was, for me, I have to fight for my freedom.
The uprising was spontaneous, unplanned, and it swept across southern Iraq like wildfire. Many of Saddam's soldiers joined the revolt.
It was a great victory. We felt just so great. There was a hope that they will get rid of Saddam, it will be over, and they will build a new Iraq.
Meanwhile, in the north of Iraq, the country's Kurds also launched an uprising.
In a few weeks, it had taken over all of Kurdistan. And so there was this enormous sense of euphoria. For the first time, the Kurds were controlling their own destiny.
But tragedy was building. Once the U.S. had expelled Saddam from Kuwait, it turned out that George Bush, despite his calls for an uprising, had no serious plans for Iraq at all.
As a result,
at the time, Thomas Pickering was high up in the U.S. government, ambassador to the United Nations.
We had wonderfully prepared combat activities, and we had absolutely no idea about what to do in a post-combat phase.
And there was no policy?
No policy, no real settled interests, no examination of what we should do, no examination of how we should deal with the future, except that we didn't want to go to Baghdad.
Deploying hundreds of thousands of troops without any idea what you're going to do?
Yep. Fairly convincingly so.
How could that have happened?
Well, it happened 13 years later. Why ask the question about 1991?
Same thing now.
Yeah.
So back in 1991, when the peace treaty was signed, the Americans forbid the Iraqis from flying their planes, but allowed them to keep using their helicopters. Helicopters which the Iraqis then used with deadly effect against the uprising.
We wanted the freedom. 3/4 of the cities are liberated and not under the control of Saddam. He's in his weakest point. We need to be liberated and we need help.
What help?
Help that America promised to give to Iraqis.
When did they promise to give help?
Well, that was through the radio and what we heard in the radio.
And that is for the Iraqi military and the Iraqi people to take matters into their own hands and force Saddam Hussein to step aside.
If you listen to what Bush said, he never explicitly said, we will give you help.
Well, that's what was understood among the people.
How do you explain then these calls for an uprising on the part of the United States?
All of the efforts to debilitate Saddam and to create problems for him in order to remove him from Kuwait were justified.
Even though the U.S. couldn't follow up afterwards to help these people who rose up?
In war and love, all's fair.